The Raptors, like they have many times this season, showed us who they are against a really good Timberwolves team. Is it time that we just start believing them? Let's talk about it.
This is the Raptors Postcast, your instant game reaction for the Toronto Raptors. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this episode of the Raptors Postcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network covering your team every day. And we're coming to you live after the Raptors 115-107 loss against the Minnesota Timberwolves on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and the Locked On Podcast feed. I'm Zulfi, Sheikh, credentialed journalist covering the Raptors and the NBA for over 2 years with outlets like Sportsnet and Raptors Republic. And now I'm one of your humble hosts of the Raptors Postcast, breaking down each and every game with you. And with me is Duane, aka Dino, our professional basketball player and analyst. He's represented Canada. He's been part of the Raptors system with the Raptors 905, and he's still hooping professionally in leagues like the CEBL. On tonight's show, we're going to talk about how the Raptors keep showing us they're a step below the league's most elite teams. We'll break down the Minnesota Timberwolves' sheer dominance in the third quarter, get some thoughts from our resident pro in a segment we like to call Take Notice. Then we'll wrap things up by handing out our player of the game, as we always do. And Duane, coming into this game, the task for the Raptors was very clear. They had to find a way to not only beat a top 10 team, but figure out some of their late game offense. Brandon Ingram said it before this game. We have to figure out our execution down the stretch, especially against good teams. He noted that himself. The Raptors were coming off that loss against the Knicks where their offense kind of just left them in the fourth quarter. The Raptors we saw had fallen victim to this many times. They did it against the Timberwolves. Quite honestly, the last time they played them, they blew an 18-point lead when they lost the fourth quarter by 12 points. Anthony Edwards went off. So the Raptors had to go against all of that. And what do? They solved the not executing the fourth quarter thing because the fourth quarter wasn't close enough for us to worry about them needing to execute. Unfortunately, the Raptors basically let the game go in the third quarter in this one. Ultimately, they're now 4-17 against top 10 teams. And it reminded me of a quote from Maya Angelou where she said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them, and believe them the first time. So Duane, I ask you, after watching this game, are the Raptors who they are? Is there no mystery to them? They're good against the rest, but struggle against the best. Sorry for becoming Dr. Seuss, but go ahead, answer the question. What do you think about this Raptors team?
I think you're completely right. Actually, I recently went to go see the new movie Screen 7. And listen, I went to the theater just going there, getting what I expected. You know, it's going to be a slasher film. I didn't expect anything too great from the story. Didn't expect anything too less. And I feel like it's the same thing with the Raptors. You know what you're going to get. To be the best, you have to be able to beat the best, and the Raptors are unable to do that, especially this part of the season. But they mentioned it, man, just working on their execution down the stretch. I think we didn't even get to that point because they're unable to hold on to leads, but then also they're getting beat in almost every statistical category. It's hard to win a basketball game when you do that. You're not making more three balls than the other team, where you're not, beating the other team in transition. It's very, very, very difficult to win basketball games. But for the Raptors, they have some self-reflection to do. It's not the end of the world, as there's still many games left in this later half of the season. But this is definitely a problem that's becoming a reoccurring issue, is them playing against the top dogs and unable to show up. Like, they got to be able to show up and step up to the fight. Again, I love that they always show their competitive nature, but at the same time, they got to figure out some type of strategy and formula to get up for these type of games because, teams are going to start punking them and realize that, it's just the Raptors, you don't want to get to that point where you're playing against these better teams and they're looking at you like you're so obsolete. So the Raptors got some, soul searching to do. And I think they'll do that with the, film and getting better with practice. But again, man, that was tough to watch.
Yeah, and when you talk about how teams are going to start viewing the Raptors a certain way, it reminds me of, and look, I'm not saying he was necessarily right when he said this, but when Patrick Beverley at one point said the Raptors don't have any dogs on this team, again, don't exactly agree with that sentiment, but teams are going to start viewing the Raptors, like you said, a certain type of way if you don't get a consistent fight out of them. You don't view them as this scrappy bunch, and you build this reputation for this Raptors team that against good teams, they can't execute in the highest leverage moments. So I guess the question for you, I'm going to present three different situations or three different ways the Raptors weren't able to execute in this game. And I want you to tell me where you think it was the most detrimental to them or what stood out to you the most out of all of these, because I think it's a good way to approach going over this game that, quite honestly, by the end, there wasn't really a lot to talk about. So for starters, the Raptors have struggled with this, but it's kind of a microcosm of one of their issues. It's closing quarters. They just haven't been able to really punctuate quarters at the end. The first quarter, they're playing pretty decent for most of it, but they give up a 9-0 run to the Wolves at the end. They end up losing that quarter, but they're keeping it tight. The second quarter, they give up a 10-3 run, which was part of a larger 16-6 run to end that quarter. And the Raptors, who were actually leading for much of the second quarter, end up going down into halftime with a deficit. And then obviously the third quarter, the Raptors basically got blown out the entire quarter, if you want to count that as not closing well. So that's one, not closing quarters well. The other one was losing the non-Anthony Edwards minutes. I think that's kind of a death nail against a superstar team when the superstar is sitting and you know they're already taking care of business. Anthony Edwards finished his game plus 15. But even without him on the court, the Wolves were plus 7. So the Raptors weren't able to get this done. And the other one is I felt like this was a very, very quiet game from Scottie Barnes and Brandon Ingram. Now, Scottie, you can look at it being somewhat efficient. He had 16 points on 7 of 12 shooting. Defensively, I thought in the first half at least, he was doing some damage against Anthony Edwards. He limited him to just 9 points on 5 shots. Right, so he was making a bit of impact, but I felt like Scottie just didn't have those moments offensively where he was taking over this game and having a greater impact, especially as a playmaker. We've seen Scottie kind of juice guys up in whether it's with his interior passing or doing stuff in transition and getting guys looks. We didn't see that tonight, and then Brandon Ingram had a very tough game. The word I kept thinking was it was a little listless, honestly. There just wasn't much oomph to his game tonight. He finished with 14 points on 5 of 16 shooting, couple honestly brutal turnovers, especially in the fourth quarter. So whether it's Scottie Barnes or Brandon Ingram being quieter than usual, losing the non-Ant minutes are just not closing quarters well. Where does your mind take you watching this game?
I think for me, it's a blended mixture of all three, but I'll start with the first one. I always kind of, playing with the Raptors 9-5 system, I played for a coach named Ryan Schmidt, who was involved with the Raptors staff and then eventually went on to the Atlanta Hawks. But his philosophy was always you want to win the first media timeout minutes and then also the closing media timeouts minutes. So that kind of reminds me of closing quarters and how impactful that is to do that, because it really also determines momentum, right? You want to go into other quarters or go into halftime or come out of halftime feeling a certain way. And I think that is very imperative, because no matter what happens to the middle part and portion of the game, if you're able to, establish yourself, but then also reestablish yourself by dominating at the end of those quarters, I think it puts you in the best position to win basketball games. But yeah, being able to have a superstar sit on the bench, you have to capitalize on those minutes. So the Raptors going forward have to figure out how to shut these X factors down. I mean, the Timberwolves are really good because they have obviously Julius Randle, they have Jaden McDaniels, they have other players. I mean, Ayo's a heck of a player that's over there. That was a great trade for them. But having, that type of secondary cast, you have to figure out how to limit them, because we've seen it before when they played the Knicks recently. It's like, yeah, you could limit Karl Anthony Towns and Jay Brunson, but in the clutch, you have to be able to slow them down, and you can't be able to keep that team in the game by not being able to control the supporting cast. So that's something they have to look forward to doing, because it's already doing you a disservice. It's like playing defense in the corner. It's like you want to use the baseline to your advantage, the coffin corner. So if you have a superstar on your bench, take advantage of that. Go at the other players and go on your own type of run. It's like in hockey, a power play. And the last thing you said about, the superstars being quiet, it was tough. I mentioned it in the last pod, man. I think Brandon Ingram's thumb, I thought it was his wrist, but they spoke about it. It might have been his thumb. That could have been a factor as to why he kind of had a down game, especially on the offensive end. We saw kind of the lack of aggression and then just him settling for a lot of mid-range shots that were contested. And then you look at a guy like Scottie, I wonder if Rudy Gobert is who he says he is, right? They say he's like one of the better defenders in the NBA, and I think he does kind of have that Wemby sense and presence where guys are kind of discouraged and attacking him. And I kind of saw that from Scottie Barnes. He was taking a couple of elbow jump shots and fadeaway shots that, he hasn't really been doing recently, and he hasn't really attacked the basket because guys like Rudy Gobert are protecting the rim. So I think that was a factor into why Scottie and guys like Brandon Ingram weren't as efficient, especially going downhill tonight. But the Raptors still have to find other solutions on the offensive end if the three ball's not going down, and especially if their main offensive threats aren't playing to their strengths.
Yeah, look, I think we need to preface a lot of this by saying, one, this is a very, very good Timberwolves team. Like you said, it's not just Anthony Edwards. He is the snake that kind of leads the way, or the head of the snake, as the phrase goes. But this is a Timberwolves team that had won 4 straight, now 5 straight. They're 13-4 since the start of February, I believe, which is second in the Western Conference. They've been one of the hottest teams in the league, quite frankly, and they've already been a really good team that's gone to back-to-back conference finals. Very good Wolves team, so we have to take that into account. It's easier said than done, obviously, going up against them. And also the Brandon Ingram point that you made, Duane, I think is fair, that he did come into this game questionable with it was a thumb sprain ultimately what the Raptors ended up calling it, and he was upgraded to be available to play. Obviously he played in this game, but he was questionable coming in, so that was something he was dealing with. But I think overall your point that you kind of nailed is that you have to take advantage of something against good teams, right? Like either you're losing the Anthony Edwards minutes or you're losing the non-Anthony Edwards minutes. If you're losing both, then it's very hard to just come out of this game with a victory. So when he's sitting down, you have to find a way to take advantage of it by shutting out some of these other guys. But when you look at the Timberwolves and how all these guys were able to get their momentum going, whether that's Rudy Gobert, who finishes with 18 and 12, Julius Randle, not the most efficient night, but I felt his points were loud. I know a lot of players say that sometimes, where some buckets just sound louder than others, or there's just more momentum to them. He had a couple plays where he either blew by Jakob Poeltl or like even Brandon Ingram on a switch, and that just built some momentum for them. A guy like Naz Reid gives you 12 points off the bench. Again, during that really big run in the third quarter that we're going to talk about, he had some very loud buckets then as well. So it's just needing to take advantage of something along the way. And the Raptors weren't able to do that tonight, especially in the third quarter. So I think it's time we get to our turning point of the game.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
All right, Duane, it sounds like an oversimplification saying that they lost this game in the third quarter. But if you look at the numbers, it's hard to argue against it in what ultimately ends up as an 8-point loss. The Raptors lost the third quarter by 13 points, 35-22. What was a 1-point deficit coming out of halftime turns into a 14-point deficit basically going into the fourth quarter. And I think the toughest part for me wasn't even, it was just like they were turning the ball over a lot. I think they only had like 3 turnovers in the quarter. It was just their execution was lackadaisical on defense. There just wasn't a ton of fight. Like I said, Anthony Edwards, you hold him to 9 points in the third quarter. What is he in the second quarter, or in the first half? Sorry. What does he do in the third quarter? He gives you 10 points. And oh yeah, he sent RJ Barrett into the shadow realm by just yamming it on him. Oh my goodness. I felt bad for RJ in that one, but he did it after crossing over Jamal Shed and basically getting inside, getting downhill without any real resistance, right? The Raptors aren't able to, they weren't giving much fight defensively. And then their execution offensively, Brandon Ingram, second game in a row with an 8-second violation. That was uncharacteristic for him. Against, you said Rudy Gobert, obviously we know the type of defender he is, but the Raptors are putting up these like just straight arm layups where like, dude, the guy's a 7-footer and a 4-time defensive player of the year. Have to get some separation. You have to do something more creative than that. And the Wolves are here running off all these misses and miscues from the Raptors going the other way. There was a 15-3 run at one point by the Timberwolves during that whole debacle of the third quarter. And the big thing for me are the note here, and you talk about it a lot, Duane, where it's your principles and how you like to play. The Raptors had 14 fast break points in the first half. They had 0 in the third quarter. And the Wolves ended up actually winning that category by the end of the game. So much got away from the Raptors in the third quarter. And I know I feel like I just vomited all that out at you, but what's your reaction to what the hell happened to them in the third quarter?
Just a massive disconnect is what I found, like you said, from just how they play, their philosophies, their principles, and just sticking to what got them in the position to be the type of team they are. But man, just being able to contain a guy like Anthony Edwards was so tough for the Raptors, and he creates so much havoc on the offensive end because of the attention that he demands. How many times did he catch the ball on the right or left wing and kind of force the Raptors into some type of deep rotation with the double team? And Anthony Edwards is such a hungry offensive player that he's able to carve defenders 1, 2, doesn't matter who's in front of him. And then he ended up making the right kickouts, like an easy double team, making the straight out pass to the guy who made the entry. And it was a trade ball, whether it was AO, whether it was, like you said, JD McDaniels attacking the basket, or whether it was a guy like Naz Reid who can always stretch the floor. So Anthony Edwards is doing a great job of just being, dominant in that third quarter. And you want to be able to contain the big dogs. And I think that's one thing the Raptors are, struggling with, is they're able to guard guys like Brunson or Anthony Edwards or these other superstars from these other teams for a quarter at a time, maybe 2 quarters at a time. But you have to be able to do it for 48 minutes and put a whole stretch together. And I think that's the toughest thing that the Raptors are not doing right now. But Anthony Edwards had his fingerprints all over that third quarter. He was dictating what he wanted to do. It felt like the Raptors were just not there on the defensive end tonight. Like the Timberwolves are able to do what they want to do. You talk about a guy like Shed, who's usually so great on ball, and he was getting blown by from half court. You talk about that highlight play that's going to be obviously a Kodak moment and be on, sports channels for, for weeks to come. But Anthony Edwards catching a body, but it was all because the Raptors were just lack of awareness on the defensive end, man. I don't know how else to say it. They seem like they're a step slow, step behind. And on the offensive end, they were just really struggling to get offense. And again, if they're not making threes, if they're not getting to the line, and if they're not being intentional on the offensive end, then it's going to be a tough, ball game for them going forward, and especially in the fourth quarter. But I also think that they need to figure out a way to be more decisive on offense. We talk about it so much, it becomes a broken record, but it really felt like it was omnipresent today, and they got to fix it. They got to fix it.
Yeah, and the irony of it is if you look at the numbers, by the numbers, it's one of their more efficient games of the season. 50% from the field, 43% from downtown. They go 9 of 21. They don't lose the three-point battle that significantly. But like you said, it just felt like their offense didn't have that oomph. There wasn't that intentionality of like drawing things up. Like the very first basket of this game for the Raptors was what? It was a baseline out of bounds play where they got Brandon Ingram curling off two screens. He gets to that baseline midi that he enjoys, and he's able to score a basket from there. You said this a lot where in the first half of games, they're really good about executing and generating these looks for their main guys. But that goes away from them in the second half. Brandon Ingram started decent. He wasn't on fire like he was last game, but by the fourth quarter, he was basically just putting up ISO pull-up middies, trying to get something going. Now, some of that was just him and his shot not falling, but some of that is just the Raptors getting away from themselves. They were able to, again, a guy like RJ has a good night, and I'm sure we're going to touch on him later. But for their offense just doesn't seem like it has much pop to it in the second half. It basically just comes down to will these shots fall in or not? And to some degree they did tonight, but when you're facing a team like the Timberwolves that have an elite offense, have guys, like you said, all over the floor, keeping up is not that simple of a task, right? And then this is a Wolves team that also is the best fourth quarter scoring team in the NBA. So they're going to give it to you right at the end of the game, and you have to keep in it. So ultimately in the third quarter, the Raptors weren't able to do that. They did quite the opposite, where they basically gave the game away. And again, we're just going to have to see, will they, between now and the end of the season, the question is, are we going to see any learning or growth in these situations against elite teams? I think we've learned that they're going to struggle against the top 10, top 6 of the NBA, but between now and the end of the season, what can you do along the way to give you something? And that's going to be the question for this team moving forward. Another question for the team, Duane, is going to be the Raptors bench that was providing a spark, but lately it's been struggling for them. And we're going to touch on that and more in our Take Notice segment of the game as we continue this episode of the Raptors Postcast. All right, this episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy, and welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Draft. With 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like Confetti Craze, Fruity Rainbow, or Cotton Candy, there's something for everyone. So the board is set, the flavors are ready, and I've got my number one pick, and I'm going with Peach Mango. It's consistently smooth at all levels, like a Brandon Ingram jumper. If you just ignore this game that he had, we're not talking about it. It's bold and balanced, like a Scotty Barnes look-back dunk on the break. So giving you that much-needed boost, and their 5 Hour Energy does all of that with zero sugar. So find your new favorite flavor at 5hourenergy.com, available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. This episode is also brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Target Center tonight was rocking, especially in that third quarter when the Wolves took over this game. Off of Nas Reed 3, the arena erupted, essentially. So that's awesome. But getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Gametime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast. Without hassle, it puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. So pull up the app, pick an upcoming game, and have tickets locked in within minutes. You get to see the view from your seat and the all-in price up front, so there are no surprise fees when checking out. And then you can also explore zone deals where you choose the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you end up saving. Everything is quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to end. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime by downloading the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. So download the Gametime app, and remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Lastly, this episode is brought to you by TurboTax. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is a lot to deal with. Trying to book an appointment that's not the most convenient, sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth and wondering if they're really getting your situation and understanding where you're coming from. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. Just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve while you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. So head to turbotax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. All right, as we continue this episode of the Raptors Postcast, be sure to check out Sean Woodley with Locked On Raptors in the morning to get more in-depth analysis of this Raptors 115-107 loss. And now we turn things over to our resident pro, Duane Notice, for our Take Notice segment of the game. Duane, what did you see from this game tonight?
Today's Take Notice segment with tonight's game was the second unit points. And I think just the lack of effort from the second unit. When you come off the bench, you want to be able to provide some reinforcement. And I think just being someone that's been a starter in my career, but also been a guy that's been the sixth man of the year in the SEC, I think the advantages of coming off the bench are great. Like, you get to see the flow of the game, see how the game is being played, see the type of pace or energy you could bring and provide to it. But I think just it's inexcusable to come off the bench and have a lack of energy. And for the Raptors, we saw it tonight. And it's not just a matter of putting the ball in the basket. It's just a matter of just being able to contain your man, keep the guy in front of you, and add value to the game, right? Everybody talks about the plus and minus aspect of basketball, but what else are you adding to the game just from the eye test standpoint, effort standpoint, just doing all those things? So for the Raptors going forward, they have to figure out how to get back to that chemistry. We had guys like Mama who were scoring 20 points a game. We had guys coming off the bench like Shed and Jacoby who are, being dual threats. And I know Grady hasn't had the playing time, but just seeing that kind of fizzle away, I think is also a key comparative to why the Raptors are kind of struggling. And, you always want to be able to have that second unit provide that reassurance, because the starters aren't going to show up. You have to have the second unit come and do their job. But going forward, the Raptors need to put other teams into closeout situations. I think that's what they struggled with tonight. The Timberwolves were moving the ball at a high level. They were attacking the paint, penetrating it, and they're really getting the ball around the perimeter to the point where the Raptors seemed like they were not on the same page with their scrambles. But vice versa, when the Raptors had the ball on offense, I feel like they didn't challenge the Timberwolves enough. The Timberwolves weren't really rotating. They were able to contain their yard. And I think that the lack of ball movement contributed to the Raptors not being able to have guys off the bench be able to make an impact on today's game.
Yeah, look, and the irony of this game is the Raptors starters by plus minus accounts, they didn't have the best game. But if you look at the last two games, and it speaks to a growing trend for the Raptors, over the last two games, the Raptors starters are a plus 14 in games that they've lost by combined 24 points, which is, again, if you're losing those games by 24 points, but your starting lineup is winning their minutes, you have to look at the bench and how brutal they've been, right? Like, it's just basic math there. And tonight, you mentioned it. Good game from Mamu, where he bounces back with 11 points and 5 of 8 shooting. He had a 1 of 6 shooting night against the Knicks, so you saw him provide a bit of pop in this game for brief moments. But Jamal Shed, 2 points and 1 of 7 shooting, again, 4 rebounds. He only has 1 assist, and like you said, like, plus minus isn't everything, and that's what was kind of the defining trait of this Raptors bench early on in the season. It wasn't necessarily that they were winning their minutes by a ton. They were quite honestly even, maybe a bit in the positive. It was the spark they're providing, the effort and energy. Guys were succeeding in their roles. Jamal Shed was great at facilitating offense, allowing a guy like IQ to play off the ball. In this game, you didn't want the ball in Jamal's hand nearly as much because the shots he was putting up were tough or contested. The decisions he was making as a ball handler weren't leading to advantages for the Raptors. Jacoby Walter, he didn't have much pop. He only ends up playing 9 minutes, doesn't even make a shot. He was 0 of 2 from the field. His defense on Anthony Edwards, or a guy like that, wasn't that crazy. Jonathan Mobile got a first quarter run in this game, which was kind of surprising. I think it was just to add some versatility against the Timberwolves bigs. Again, you don't expect a guy like that to make a difference on your game. He did what he could. Not like Jamison Battle. He's playing against his hometown team, right? He's pumped up to play in Minnesota in an arena he grew up kind of watching. He gets a look in the fourth quarter. He puts up 3 shots, makes 1 of them. You just need more consistency from your bench. In a game, you end up losing by 8 points. Your starters do a decent enough job, and you end up coming out with this loss. You start having to look at your bench, and there's a reason why a guy like Darko is trying so many different rotations, trying so many different patterns, because at this point of the season, he's searching. He's searching to see who's going to be able to step up. And the unfortunate reality for the Raptors bench right now is that every night it's one of them. You have a good Jacoby game, but then every other guy's quiet. Tonight you have a good Mamu game, but then Jacoby and Jamal Shed are basically no shows, right? You need to have 2-3 guys giving you an even keel effort to hopefully get some consistency, because again, in the bench, you're going to have these guys need in the playoffs. I mean, you're going to need this bench giving you these minutes consistently, even if the rotation's tighter. And this goes all the way back to the start of the season when Darko Rajakovic basically said, look, these guys aren't going to get long leashes or long run. They're going to have to do stuff in spot minutes. It's going to be bursts. It's going to be like 3 to 5 minute intervals where they're going to have to come in and be impactful. So it's not like this is new to them. It's just that lately we haven't been seeing it from them. And it's been, again, like indicative of the Raptors as a whole. But if you're going to turn it around against these top teams, you're going to need your bench to start producing more consistently. But we always like to end on a more positive note than a negative note. So let's get to our player of the game and see if we can provide some, levity to what this game was.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
All right, Duane, player of the game time. We can look. I think there's 2 guys you look at. I guess I know where you're going to lean ultimately, but I think I'm between Emmanuel Quickly, 18 points, 7 assists, 6 of 10 from the floor. He hits 2 threes. Then there was RJ Barrett, 25 points, 6 rebounds, 9 of 14. He makes 4 threes himself. Pretty efficient night for him. If you had to pick a player of the game, where are you going?
Man, I'm going with RJ. Love to see the confidence rolling. We mentioned it last game, but his ability to just be decisive on the offensive end, stepping into his 3 balls with confidence, but playing downhill, which is a key strength for him, attacking the basket, getting to the free throw line, and not forcing things, right? Keeping it simple, playing off 2, playing off his pivot. Just love seeing him attack the basket, because like that's the type of dog when you speak about Patrick Beverley saying the Raptors don't have any dog. That's kind of like the representation of Canada, the guy who's quiet. He's not going to be barking. You saw when he got dunked up by AE, he ran back on defense, or he ran back on offense right away. He didn't want to fight. He didn't, so I like guys like that who are just ready for the battle and intense. And I just like that he's stepping up, especially after struggling recently. So it's good for his confidence, and hopefully he can continue to play at a high level.
Yeah, again, I think the biggest thing for RJ Barrett throughout all of this has been just the quality with which he's finishing through contact. I've really enjoyed. He's been patient in the painted area. He's drawing fouls at a really nice rate as well. He got 4 free throws in this game. He was able to get Anthony Edwards on a nice play as well, where he got some free throws out of it. So just, again, being efficient with the ball in his hands. With RJ Barrett, we keep saying, can you do more with less? And when he was coming back from injury, he was obviously a little rusty, and you saw him maybe getting back to those situations where he had the blinders on a little bit. So hopefully this is kind of a sign of what's more to come. He's getting back inside comfortably around the painted area. I think he's feeling healthier, so he's willing to navigate those situations a bit better, and that opens up so much more of his game. So for RJ Barrett, he gets our player of the game, 25 points, 6 rebounds, again, 9 of 14 shooting. Good game from him. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to, this is an interesting question we got in the comments saying, are people really that worried? Seems like maybe they were sacrificing wins to try different lineups. I'm not sure I necessarily agree that they were just sacrificing wins. I think the Raptors are trying to win these games against really good teams. But Darko has said he wishes he could play these good teams all the time so he can learn something from all of them, right? So Duane, very quickly before we wrap up, are you that worried about the Raptors?
Not worried. I think I'm a little bit cautious. I don't know if that's the same thing, and if I'm kind of getting out with a cheat code there. But again, at some point, they're going to have to start fixing these things before these leaks become full breaks. So again, not worried, but you can see the potential danger there, and you want to figure out if there's going to be any solutions along the way in the journey so that when they get to their destination, they can be prepared for battle. So again, not worried, but it's definitely a little concern. It's like I have my hazards on.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think I said it earlier. Between now and the end of the season, we need to see them just show something in these games against elite teams. That's truthfully it. Because in the grand scheme of things, this is the Raptors, but hopefully their return to the playoffs for the first time since 2022, the first time being relevant again. So you don't need all of it to happen at once, but we've seen so many of these games now against these elite teams where they just haven't met the moment that I just want to see some kind of learning or building block along the way. You said it when you said hazards, it made me think of in these games, they've looked like a deer in headlights. And at what point are you going to start to not look like that anymore, where you're a little comfortable, where you can see these Raptors saying that okay, we kind of know what to expect. We're not going to freeze. Right. So once the Raptors stop freezing, I'll feel a bit better. But until then, like you said, I'm concerned more than anything, and we'll see how it goes. But we don't need to expect the sun and the moon right away. But we'll continue that, and we'll see how the Raptors do as the season goes on. But for now, that does it for us. For myself, Zulfi, Sheikh, and Duane Notice, thank you to everyone who tuned in live, and for those listening the morning after. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Raptors on all platforms. And don't forget to comment below if you have any thoughts. We'll be back on Sunday live after the Raptors host Cooper Flag and the Dallas Mavericks. So we'll see you then, breaking it all down on the Raptors Postcast. Peace.